Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show, while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, we see that what's occurring all throughout the United States of America, as I speak into this microphone today, has one thing in common. There's this one centralized theme that we see repeating itself time and again all throughout the annals of power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. That is this animosity by those who currently wield political power towards the supreme law of the land, our shared United States Constitution. If there's one thing that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I have oft-times reiterated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it's that there is this orchestrated effort by far too many people who claim to be leaders of the community to divorce ourselves from and to distance ourselves from the supreme law of the land. Of course, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution, what is commonly referred to as the Supremacy Clause, the Constitution itself is what is and stands as the supreme law of the land. Of course, this doesn't play well for the political powers that be, those that would do anything in their power to divide and conquer the American people. Why? Because it would go against their narrative of gaining and holding on to power. Of course, they were never meant to have the massive amounts of power which they have illicitly amassed for themselves at the great expense of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. It comes down to that. It's this narrative that we've seen play itself out time and again ever since the inception of our country 235 years ago. Why would they engage in these sorts of twisted machinations? Why would they do everything that they have been doing to essentially strip and deprive the true, hard-working, decent, red-blooded American citizens of their fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to them by their Creator, the God of nature? The answer to this question, again, is what I mentioned just a few seconds ago, that of power. And it brings to mind that old adage that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's where we find ourselves currently in the United States of America. And no matter what these twisted people try and convince you of, and no matter how they try and candy coat or sugarcoat the reality of what they're doing, there is no mistake that what they are in fact engaged in is diametrically opposed to the hopes, dreams, aspirations, and desires, as well as consent of the American people. It's truly troubling to see the way that this has been playing out, particularly as of late. We all know that throughout these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, that there has been this well-orchestrated, purposefully and intentionally designed effort to tear this once thriving nation apart at the very seams. And they engage in this with the sort of divisiveness and viciousness that has heretofore been unknown in the United States. Again, it's a duplicitous sort of activity that they engage in. It's something that cannot be ignored, yet it is becoming an integral part of what their twisted machinations are. And everywhere we turn in America, we see that they have turned to these sorts of tactics and strategies that really have no place in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. I bring these things to your attention because I want to empower you. I want you to have the power to put your foot down and to just utter at the top of your lungs, just to state to all of these charlatans and hucksters that no, they are incapable of stripping and depriving us of our fundamental and inalienable rights. They are not allowed to fundamentally, drastically, and irreparably transform the United States of America away from a representative Republican form of government that recognizes the absolute sovereignty and the purity of the sovereignty of the American people. When we stop and think about it, that was what was revolutionary about the image that our founding fathers came up with 235 years ago. I've done solo flight special editions before that focus squarely on the traditional definitions of sovereignty and how our founding fathers took the revolutionary step of drastically and permanently changing it away from being concentrated in either a small group, what would be known as an oligarchy, or also being concentrated just in the hands of a singular individual. Think about it for a moment, folks. When you look back at the medieval period of our history, I know it's a long time ago, and many may wonder how that has any connection with what is currently occurring in this country. It boils down to this idea that the king was absolute sovereign, that the king had full say over life and death, and this caste system that was established throughout the medieval European nations was indissoluble. At least that was the thinking at the time. It took a great deal of evolution from the time of the Field of Runnymede back in 1216, in which Prince John, or King John I of England, was forced to sign the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter, which was an agreement between the baronage of England, basically your nobility, and the supreme sovereign, saying that sovereignty in England was to be reduced to that of king and those in parliament. And what was so amazing about that is we see that it took away the ability of the king just at a whim and at carte blanche to raise taxes. He needed the consent of the governed. Of course, at that time, the governed were limited rather disingenuously only to the upper elites. Now, we see that that's what the people who are currently wielding the reins of political power in the United States are attempting to achieve and accomplish again. They want to redefine the United States, again, consolidating power in the hands of a so-called elite few. This is not only pure unadulterated snobbery, it's the sort of elitism that disenfranchises huge swaths of the popular sovereigns from our system of polity. And it has only been getting worse as the years go by. We see that for at least the last 60 years, and more accurately the past century and a half, there has been this incessant effort to further consolidate power and absolute supreme authority in the hands of the elite. Why? Why is it that we have allowed ourselves to go down a path that our founding fathers warned us to avoid like the plague? How is it that we have turned away from all that matters, from all that we were founded upon, in order to essentially redefine who we are, not only as a nation, but also as a people? The answer to that is rather shocking. It's been the direct result of the nefarious Fabian Socialists, who trace their origins back to 19th century Great Britain, and whose original iconography was that of a wolf in sheep's clothing, to really put out on full display what it is they're doing. They seek to micromanage everything. And take for instance the competing and conflicting Supreme Court decisions that were handed down yesterday. I know that we discussed them on yesterday's program, but now let's actually start looking at the conflicting logic. There was that case involving our Second Amendment rights, and then there was the case that shot down the Texas laws on abortion. Now, many would try and argue, many on the left that is, would try and argue that the right to abortion is sacrosanct. It's something that is well established ever since the Supreme Court handed down the decision of Roe v. Wade, which, by the way, also involved a Texas abortion law. Here's the problem. The whole notion of the right to an abortion is found nowhere directly in the clear and concise language found within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. To say otherwise is to ignore the clear and original meaning and intent of the black letter law. And what I mean when I say black letter law, that's the clear and concise language as it's written in the document itself. Instead, it's a rather tortured, tenuous type of logic, if we can even call it logic, that was drawn out to create a right that did not previously exist, a right that was not well founded in the historical traditions of the United States of America, and one that was not clearly enumerated within the Constitution. In other words, what was happening is there was this slow, gradual process of stripping plenary or near absolute power away from the state governments and making them subsidiary in totality to the federal government. Now, folks, if we recall that the American War of Independence was fought over a separation from a centralized power, to restore power to the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, the people, we see that what our federal government is engaging in now is a complete, total abandonment of those original foundational principles that form an inherent part of the DNA of the United States of America. There's no way to sugarcoat that. There's no way to parse that. That is an integral part of who we are. And it has always been the case that the United States valued the supreme sovereignty of the individual. That is sacrosanct here, or at least it was for a very long time. However, we have slowly begun to move away from that. We have turned our backs onto our principles, and that allows the court to start protecting rights that are not clearly enumerated within the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. Now, what's so duplicitous about that is when we look at the other Supreme Court decision that was handed down yesterday, that Second Amendment case, which is just shocking. It's that a right that is specifically enumerated in the United States Constitution has been encroached upon. It's been belittled in a way that is contradictory to the clear and concise language that's contained within the four corners of the Constitution. That, too, cannot be allowed to stand, because it shows that the court is acting in a way that it was never intended to. Now, as Jeremy and I have mentioned before, on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer, when you divorce yourselves from the clear and concise language of the United States Constitution and act in a way that is contrary to it, you are violating the supreme law of the land. And we can say that with the absolute certainty that we do, because it goes against everything, absolutely everything that is founded in the clear and concise language of the Constitution. And the name of the Second Amendment case is the Voisin case. And we did discuss that at some length during last night's program. But it bears this analysis here, because we know that Justice Breyer, who wrote the majority opinion in the abortion case that struck down the Texas laws, said that those Texas regulations were onerous. And really, even though they were designed to protect the community or those seeking to obtain an abortion, the health of a woman, it wouldn't stop the people like Kermit Gosnell. Remember, Kermit Gosnell was that abortion doctor who had violated every safety protocol, every safety feature, and of course, the frothing at the mouth Fabian Socialists who are hell-bent on creating rights that don't exist and destroying the rights that are well-founded within the Constitution just wanted to ignore that. They did everything in their power to say that that didn't matter, and therefore they were going to let him get away with anything. And it was literally placing the health of the mother in direct jeopardy. When we have contradictions in the law, it begins to undermine the sanctity of the law. It begins to make people lose faith in the law. And that is ultimately what it comes down to with these nefarious Fabian Socialists. They're doing this not to promote rights that aren't found in the Constitution. They are intentionally destabilizing the existing political structure and framework in the hopes of redeveloping it and painting it out in the sort of image that they wish to convey. In other words, they wish to destroy the representative republic that is the longest-lasting, uninterrupted, constitutionally endowed republic in the history of mankind with a Fabian socialist system, or indeed any socialist system, period. And the problem with such a system is that it has a well-established track record of failure. There is no success with socialism. Just spin the globe and see how well it's working. When you look at Great Britain, the whole issue of Brexit fully demonstrated that they were trying to move away from the redistributive schemes that had been dreamed up by the Fabian Socialists that dominate the so-called European Union, or EU. They wanted to have their sovereignty. They wanted to be able to act independently, to think for themselves, to do what they thought was in their best interest. And who can blame them? When we turn and look at these sorts of governments that are so far divorced from the people, there is no way that they can adequately address concerns and problems that arise with respect to particular geographical regions, and certainly not with respect to the rights of sovereign individuals. Of course, in Europe, it's a more attenuated sort of thing because they don't have the notion of sovereignty as we do here in the United States. For them, it's more akin to the old system that our founding fathers engaged in, that long, drawn-out, bloody conflict known as the American War of Independence, to separate themselves from, to divorce themselves from, and to provide us with this system that we have today. Now, I know it may seem like this is a very dry subject, or a very dry topic, but it's important when we consider that there are so many who don't even realize what sort of government we have, and are looking for some sort of messianic figure to plummet down from the heavens on a quaff waffle and save them. We've got to get away from that, because when you stop and think about it in true form, and in the totality of the circumstances, if you turn to somebody who claims that they and they alone possess the power to save the country, that means that they also alone possess the power to destroy the country. And that is a real risk that we're running, particularly when the highest office in the land, that of President of the United States of America, has been fundamentally transformed into something that it was never constitutionally endowed to be. Nowhere in Article 2, which defines and provides the scope and limitations of the executive branch of government, do we see that it is in the purview of the federal government or of the president to legislate. Now, the federal government can legislate pursuant to Article 1, Section 8. You see, the way that the natural order of things works, or the way that the natural law works, it's that all of this authority must be traced back to a power which is specifically enumerated to that particular branch of government within the clear and concise language of the Constitution. Anything outside of that is reserved to the state governments and to the people respectively. And it's only reserved to the state governments in so much as they are a representative body of their people or their constituents. That is the way it was always meant to be. And that's because the entire natural order of things, or the natural law outlook, is that it starts with the fundamental building block of society. And as we have oft times reiterated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that natural order of things starts with the family. The family is a governmental unit. The nuclear family is the fundamental, indissoluble building block of society. That's why religions all throughout the world have attempted to foster safe and stable family environments for which the progeny of a particular community and society could be raised in relative comfort and safety. When we go away from that, when we abandon that, we allow twisted machinations and perversions of the worst sort to come to fruition. That's a dangerous precedent that we're setting for ourselves, and we see with the Voineres, or Voines, or Voisin, rather, case, that we go away from that. We are turning our back on the natural order of things and embracing something that's not in the Constitution. And Associate Justice Clarence Thomas, in his well-designed dissenting opinion, was absolutely correct in saying that what was happening here goes against the natural order of things. We are not so cavalier with any other fundamental and inalienable right enjoyed and exercised by the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. Imagine, if you will, that we did that with the First Amendment. Let's say you go out and say something that someone disagrees with, and they're offended. This is where Jeremy's example on last night's program relating to the so-called hate crimes legislation comes to mind. The reason it does is we see that it's trying to limit a right in the way that was never intended to occur. It's an attempt to redefine the nation and to redefine rights. But remember, this is where the little-known, little-understood aspect of the Ninth Amendment comes directly into play. And I say that it comes into play because it says that the rights are not to be construed in such a manner as to belittle or encroach upon or to deny other rights that are included within that sacred document, being the United States Constitution. It all comes down to a government that is attempting to outstep its boundaries. The Constitution does more than just define us as a nation and as a people. It mandates the proper scope and application of government, as well as outlines it for us to fully understand what it is. And therefore, it is of the utmost importance that our prerogative be to foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of the Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable rights. All of these things work together in tandem to create this open and honest system that has been the longest contiguous running representative republic that is constitutionally endowed in the course of human events. Now that may sound very abstract. It may sound as though, why is this important? Why are we discussing these notions that were first delivered 235 years ago? And certainly it becomes all the more puzzling and enigmatic when you consider that a sitting federal judge, a rather well-known sitting federal judge of the Republican Party, by the name of Richard Posner came out and said that he sees no value in the Constitution. He's, in a sense, reiterating the same line that Donald J. Trump reiterated or uttered back in 2012. The problem that we have with all of this is, first of all, there's that pesky little supremacy clause that states that the United States Constitution itself constitutes the supreme law of the land. That's Article 6, Clause 2. It's something that we've brought up ad nauseum on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. But it goes even deeper than that, because every governmental officer and official has sworn an oath to uphold and defend the United States Constitution from all enemies, whether they be foreign or domestic. Why would that be so important? Why would we place such emphasis on that? We place the emphasis on that because it goes to the heart of the matter of who we are, both as a nation and a people. And the sooner that we realize that, and the sooner that we stay loyal to that, the better off we'll be, because that is the only way that we can maintain the great amount of liberties and freedoms that we enjoy in our capacity as popular sovereigns of the United States of America. That is our bedrock principle. Unlike what Barack Hussein Obama said in front of the cameras for the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, that racism was an inherent part, or rather is an inherent part, of America's DNA, it's freedom, liberty, and a well-founded distrust of centralized, overzealous governmental tyranny and authority that forms up the intrinsic strains of America's DNA. Again, this goes down the lines of what the revisionist historians and the various other educators who are seeking to indoctrinate the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born, are just frothing at the mouth to achieve. They have been working incessantly, relentlessly, and tirelessly towards achieving this goal for the past century and a half. The Fabian Socialist infiltration of our society has been wholly detrimental. It has worked against everything that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing, and dare I say vibrant, representative republic and community of popular sovereigns which belongs squarely to us, we the people. Again, it comes down to a fundamental disconnect that they have with respect to who we are. They want to redefine us. They want us to become docile and to capitulate to their twisted machinations, irrespective of the detrimental or deleterious impact that might have on we the people. It is such a disgusting thing to see, because it really does work against all that is beautiful about the United States of America. And I find it all the more intellectually disingenuous on their part that they feign to love the United States when they sit there and say that they want to fundamentally transform it. Why? Why is it necessary to fundamentally transform the United States of America? And when you stop and think about this in a logical and objective fashion, you'll find that there is no logical reason to do so. There is no justifying rationale which is applicable to this. Rather, this is their dark and twisted machinations. This is their attempt to completely redefine the United States of America, both as a nation and as a people. And that is truly twisted. It's twisted in how it affects us. It's twisted in how it works against all that we value. And you see, this is where those twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism really come into play. They are working in such a way as to strip and deprive the American people of their fundamental and inalienable rights. And that has been the goal from the beginning. So for the past 150 years, they have been pushing towards this. They have been working against us. They have been ignoring our best interests. Why? Because of greed. Greed and the lust for power. We see that that has become an intrinsic part of their message. It has become an integral part of what they seek to achieve. But it's not in our best interests, and it never has been. And that is why, again, we must be ever vigilant with respect to proactively maintaining and safeguarding our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. It comes down to us. The responsibility and the onus falls squarely on our shoulders. No one else is entrusted with this vast array of power. No one else is entrusted with the ability to fundamentally transform the country. And that's because our founding fathers intrinsically understood that the natural law, by its very nature, is timeless. In other words, the natural law tenets that form the foundation and the bedrock principles of this representative republic are just as applicable today as they were 235 years ago, and as, God willing, they will be 235 years from now. But the Fabian Socialists, people like Barack Hussein Obama, people like Hillary Rotten Clinton and Vermont Senator Nightface Bind Me Sanders, the Flying Saucer, don't view it that way. They don't like the thought that there is something greater than themselves. And that's troubling in and of itself. When we really sit down and think about it, that too should be unsettling or disturbing to the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. And I say that because it goes against all that we hold near and dear. When they go in a way that is diametrically opposed to our rights, they are moving in a direction that is opposed to you. It's in a direction that shows that they loathe and despise you, not themselves, not the system that they're working to create. No, they loathe and despise you. And they loathe and despise you because you, and you alone, in your capacity as a popular sovereign and a citizen of the United States of America, possess the key to stop them. Now, what is this key of which I speak? That key of which I speak is none other than our United States Constitution. That is what allows us to be a free people. That is what defines us as a free people. And unless and until we return to strict adherence to the clear and concise language that is contained within the four corners of that sacred document, we're going to continue to see these problems play out in this disastrous fashion that they have been. And it's troubling. It's troubling because no matter what we do, they will always work in such a way as to try and strip and deprive us of our rights, because deep down they know that those rights stand between them and their propagandistic agenda. That propagandistic agenda of which they push and for which they have worked so diligently towards is about stripping and depriving us of everything so that they can control. And the problem is, we see that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, has been going along with it. Worse yet, we see that the presumptive nominee for the gutless opposition party, the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian, Donald Trump, also goes along with this. He's walking back so many of the things that he stated that had won him the adulation of the Lion Branch Trumpidians. They thought that he would be the one to enforce our borders. They thought he would be the one that would end corruption, when he himself is the father of crony capitalism, and the sort of vile corruption that just has infiltrated and infested every nook and cranny of our system of polity. So if we're going to try and dislodge the sort of corruption, the sort of global elitism that has been dominating the arena of politics, not only in the United States of America, but also in the geopolitical sphere, meaning all throughout the world, why would we turn to one of the pillars of that have been funding that from the get-go? It's just not a good idea. And I say it's not a good idea because it works against the entire narrative of who we are as a people. And that, in and of itself, goes against the foundational principles of the United States. Again, when we think of this in the logical form that our founding fathers had in mind, when they devised this country, we see that their machinations are working against the very root and foundation of the United States. That's dangerous. It's dangerous because they are seeking to strip us of our identity. Now, yes, they'll play that twisted little game where they try and engage in what is known as identity politics. Identity politics is not about sovereignty. It's not about our freedoms. It's not about our liberties. It's about moving against us. It's about pitting American citizen against American citizen so that these twisted Fabian Socialists can work out their machinations to our great detriment. Again, none of that works for us. None of that is in our best interests. And unless and until we start to go back to the foundational roots of this country, we're going to see these problems double down. These problems will work against us, and those who are attempting to strip and deprive us of our rights will do so for their own political self-aggrandizement. Again, that's not good. It's wholly detrimental in every facet and aspect of the term. And it's tragic to see that the United States of America is being propelled into such an untenable situation, because it shows that these people, come hell or high water, are going to just keep working on their goals, irrespective of the harm it causes, with no consideration to how it tears this country apart. Again, everywhere that you have a left-wing philosophy or ideology take root, it is cemented as a form of destruction. The entire impetus behind left-wing doctrine is destructive because it's parasitic by nature. It cannot create. Left-wingers do not create. They only destroy. And that's something that we've warned about time and again on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer. Again, it comes down to what we must do in our capacity and our responsibility as popular sovereigns and free citizens of this representative republic of ours. Now, I know that that's not an easy position to be placed in. I know it's not an easy thing to accomplish, and it's never a small task. But it must be done. It must be done because if we fail to stand up for our rights, it is that we lose everything. That's something that Jeremy has oft-times reiterated on past episodes of The Wright Flyer. If we do not have our rights, we do not have the say over our own destiny. We aren't even allowed to live. It means that somebody else is going to act upon the rights of the people. Someone else is going to sit there and try and say that we are without any say in our lives. That is dangerous. It's dangerous because it means that those who have no right to our rights are attempting to infringe upon our rights. Now that may seem, again, like I'm going off on some tangential notion here, some abstract thing that has no application to the facets of your daily lives. But the fact of the matter is, it boils down to an inescapable truth, a self-evident truth, that a free society is one in which the government leaves the people alone. But the only way that the government is going to leave people alone is for the people to proactively stand up to them, to say, no, we are not going to allow you to just trample upon our rights. We're not going to allow you to re-identify us or to re-envision who we are as a nation and a people. Because that works against our sacred Constitution. It works against the supreme law of the land, and it tears us apart. And unless and until the government gets back into some modicum of sanity and is put back into the box that it needs to be placed in, we're going to see this death spiral that is afflicting the United States as I speak into this microphone get even worse. Because these forces, these diabolical forces of tyranny, despotism, and above all, oppression, will never give up their fight. They will never back down. And again, that ties into the notion that they are the ones holding all the cards. But that's not who we are. That's not the way that our nation was designed. And see, that's what people don't want you to think about. That's what the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media doesn't want you to think about. That's what nefarious Fabian socialists like Barack Hussein Obama don't want you to think about. Because it means that you, by your very nature and in your capacity as a popular sovereign of the United States of America, can put your foot down and say no. But the problem that we have, particularly with respect to the 2016 presidential election cycle, is that neither mainstay candidate stands up for our rights. And then looking at that Supreme Court case, looking again at the Voisin case, we see that what it's really boiling down to is an attempt to have an end run around the Second Amendment. Much like the background checks, much like these claims that no fly, no buy, or we cry. Again, it's a dangerous path that we're walking down. A misdemeanor cannot be used to deprive rights. And it's even tenuous to say that felonies should be allowed to. Yes, while you are paying your debt to society. But once you're out, you're supposed to have a clean slate. But we've gotten away from that. We've gone into this sort of perpetual sort of system where it's saying that those rights are given to you by the government, which means that the government can take it away. And if you break the rules of the government, it takes it away. When in fact the whole reason that we have a criminal justice system and the whole reason that we have punishment is to protect the rights of others. You see, it's if you infringe upon the rights of a fellow sovereign individual citizen, that is when you must be adjudicated under due process under the law, meaning with a notice and a hearing, and to be able to face your accusers, that you can then temporarily lose that right. It should not be indefinitely. It should not be permanently. Now, I had a dear friend who was having a discussion with me who said that murderers should lose it forever. Well, here's the thing. Murderers should face the death penalty, capital punishment, or life imprisonment. But when you see what the Fabian Socialists are doing, they are the ones that attempt to undermine the defenses, and not just the defenses, but also the entire sound foundation of the country, of the government, and of the criminal justice system to such a degree that we don't hold anybody accountable. The Fabian Socialists don't want to hold people accountable. And we see that reflected in the persona and in the messaging of the various candidates who are currently vying for the highest office in the land when, take for instance, Donald Trump. Whenever he has a gaffe, it's never his fault. The Lion Branch Trumpidians go out and scream in all of the annals of social media and attempt to blame somebody else. They point the finger at everybody else, or any criticism must be that of a left-wing conspiracy. Now, how is that any different than when Hillary Clinton goes in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and attempts to proclaim that anything that is said against her is part of some vast right-wing conspiracy? It's not. And then I have another friend of mine who came out and said that it's basically just kooky conspiracy theorist garbage to say that the government's coming out to get your guns. Really? The decision that was handed down in the Voisin case yesterday shows that they are attempting to marginally, incrementally move upon our right to keep and bear firearms. And even in the language of the case itself, it said that the right to keep and bear firearms is a right at this time. In other words, they're looking at it as a limited time span, that the right's days are numbered. You have to read between the lines to get at it, and that's what the Fabian Socialists are so adept towards. They sit there, and they use obtuse, vague, and ambiguous language to redefine words. This is the twisted, dark game of semantics that we've been warning you about ever since we first took off over the friendly airwaves back on September 11th of 2015. By changing the meanings of words, by hijacking the lexicon that is commonly understood, they can then change things to mean whatever they want them to fit their agenda at any given moment in time. That is their goal. It's all about power. It's always about power. It always comes back to what they are trying to foist upon the American people, irrespective of whether the American people desire it or not. But that, too, goes against one of the fundamental tenets of our rights. It goes against one of the fundamental aspects of our Constitution, that it's based on the natural law, and that the natural law, by its nature, is timeless. Why would it always boil down to this? Why must we always have this fight? Well, we must have this fight because these people have managed to lull the American people into a false sense of security. So let's take one of the great quotes of Benjamin Franklin, one of our most brilliant founding fathers, when he said that those who sacrifice essential liberties for a fleeting sense of security deserve neither liberty nor security and shall surely have neither. Okay, in the Voisin case, it was handed down yesterday, we see that the argument was these people were convicted of misdemeanor domestic abuse. And notice that this can change in definition, in scope, and application from state to state. That, too, is part of the tenets of federalism. However, with the Second Amendment, there is a federal law. And because the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution pursuant to the language of not only Article 5 of the Constitution, but also to the language found in the preamble to the Bill of Rights, we see that that is an intrinsic part of the Constitution as if it had been included within the four corners of the document at the time of its original ratification. And then, applying Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause, we see that what the Supreme Court was doing was working against the supreme law of the land. And the states that would put these sorts of prohibitions in were working against the supreme law of the land. It presents a very dangerous and slippery slope that we face when we see these sorts of things. And our rights are too significant, too important to just allow knee-jerk, emotion-based reactions to dictate whether those rights are maintained, whether those rights remain indissolubly and indefinitely as they were intended to by our founding fathers, or whether we embrace a system that is wholly, totally foreign and alien to our system of polity. Again, I think that the answers here and the solutions here are open and obvious. The Constitution is the key. The Constitution is what keeps us free. The Constitution defines us as a nation and as a people. And the further we move away from that, the more deleterious impacts we start to see within our country. The unraveling of the societal fabric of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours can be directly linked to this departure from the supreme law of the land. And that is dangerous. Again, everything that we see from the contradictory attitude of the Supreme Court and the way that they have been working against our rights goes against what we hold near and dear. It goes against the sanctity of the law. Because if you remember, the old adage goes that the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men. Equal protection under the law means that the law should apply to any and all of us in equal fashion. But we see that they are attempting to engage in these sorts of identity politics and gender politics and hyphenating the true definition and citizenship of the American people. That's why they can find the so-called penumbras of the Constitution, some right to privacy, which is then extended to abortion. Well, then, let's take the right to privacy with domestic abuse cases and extend it to the Second Amendment. Why is it that if there is one mistake that's made, even if it's reckless conduct, because remember, it goes to the mens rea. To have a crime, you have to have an actus reus, or guilty act, a mens rea, or guilty mind, or guilty conscience, occurring within a specific time frame. And if you go against that, you don't have a crime. And the mens rea is usually defined in criminal statutes as some form of either knowing, intentionally, recklessly, wantonly. However, with the supreme law of the land, to not violate the supreme law of the land, it has to be that we go first and foremost by the Constitution itself. And the Constitution says that rights and property cannot be deprived without due process under the law and without fair, just compensation. That's the Fifth Amendment's due process clause, as well as its prohibition against an unlawful governmental taking. Also, the Second Amendment clearly states in no uncertain terms that the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say unless they're convicted of domestic abuse. It doesn't say unless they are carrying an assault-type weapon. It doesn't say any of that. Again, this is legal construction 101. Now, what do I mean when I say legal construction? Legal construction just means reading statutes. And the courts have held time and time and time again that when reading a statute, you give the statute, or the law, its clearest meaning, its most direct meaning. So the right of the people being the most direct thing, that's the subject, the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. We see that that means exactly what it says. It means that that right is indissoluble, that that right is non-negotiable, it's non-delegable, it cannot be taken away except in the case where someone infringes upon the rights of another individual. And yes, in the case of domestic abuse cases, that's true. However, there are mitigating circumstances that need to be taken into consideration, and recklessness should be that. How could it be that someone may not know who was in the house and was seeking to defend the family, and that be considered domestic abuse, or if it's against someone whom the domestic partner has never met before, that may have been a family member? That, too, is considered domestic abuse. That, too, is considered part of the defining impetus of what domestic abuse is. And the problem is that that would be reckless. It would be unintentional. So without having a very strong mens rea application to it, and without actually considering the great magnitude of what's happening when you start stripping and depriving rights of citizens over a misdemeanor, that's like saying that you lose your right to drive from one speeding ticket, because that's a misdemeanor. Yes, there is a sliding scale of severity with respect to misdemeanors, and don't get me wrong, folks, I'm not saying that domestic violence or domestic disputes is a good thing, and those that are engaged in such criminality should be held accountable to the full weight and extent of the law. However, that's the part there, weight and extent of the law. If Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause, states in no uncertain terms that the United States Constitution itself composes the supreme law of the land, that is the full weight and extent of the law. Now, while they're incarcerated, yes, they should not be able to have guns, but that does not mean that they should forever lose their rights. That is a dangerous precedent to be set. It's one that is diametrically opposed to not only the black letter law, meaning the letter of the law, but also to the spirit of the law. Why did our founding fathers give us these rights? To protect ourselves from government. And the Supreme Court itself has already stated that it is not the duty nor is it the obligation of the various police departments all throughout the United States to defend you or to protect you. That onus and duty is on you. That's why we have the Second Amendment. So what they're saying is that if you have made a mistake, you lose your right to defend yourself. Well, then who's going to protect you? No one. No one. They are essentially saying that your worth and value as a human being is over. That is wrong. It's wrong in every facet of the Constitution. And there's even an amendment that speaks clearly to that. The Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, comes into play right here and right now with respect to this issue. And I say that because when you stop and examine what it is that they are stripping and depriving these people from, it's the ability to keep themselves safe. Yes, they were reckless. Again, going back to the mens rea, going back to what they were trying to attack people with, to establish this crime, the entire thing cannot work out that way because it is a fundamental and inalienable right. And when you go against a fundamental and inalienable right, that's a God-given right. Go back to what George Mason had concluded when he was called upon to help draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia. He held that these rights were fundamental, that they were God-given rights, and that they could not just be willy-nilly taken away, that it goes against the true heritage, character, spirit of who we are, both as a nation and a people. And that is what inspired the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. And we are so fortunate that James Madison allowed that to be included. Because could you imagine how they would run ramshod on our liberties and our civil rights if we did not stand together and have this ability to say, no, these 10 amendments say you cannot do that, and cruel and unusual punishment would be to expose someone to greater danger, rather. And the Constitution has to be considered in the totality of the circumstances here, too. We can't just willy-nilly pick and choose the aspects of that sacred social compact that we wish to have apply. It has to be done in absolute full completeness. Fullness is required. And I can say that with the amount of certainty that I do, because when you stop and consider what the Constitution does, it is there to protect us against the government. You see, one of the things that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media likes to do when they go out and they peddle their false and erroneous narrative to dupe and to deceive the American people, it's that they want to call it negative rights. I know. Sounds hideous, horrendous, doesn't it? Negative rights. Negative. That just brings up all of these connotations that make people feel bad. It brings up a notion that it's bad, dark, twisted, maniacal, evil, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Because when you stop and think about it, what is negative about the Constitution? It is negating the government's ability to just come forth and encroach upon rights. And that is a central pillar of the American system of polity. It helps define who we are. And it has been an integral part of the proper functioning of the United States since its inception 235 years ago. Folks, that is amazing. It's amazing when you stop and consider that it's still in place. All despite the great turpitudes that have occurred throughout history. Since the inception of this country, it has maintained its vitality and viability. It is just as applicable now as it was at the start of the country. And that, too, is amazing. It's amazing in the capacity that it goes forth and shows that we have not abandoned our original position. Now, those nefarious politicians who are attempting to redefine who we are as a nation and a people do want to take it away. They do want to interrupt it. They want to force it to be something that it was never meant to be. That is why we have the adversarial system of law that we do. It's because you have to be able to stand up in zealous fashion to tell those who would do anything to try and take away your rights that no, they are not endowed with the authority to do that, that they do not have the capability to do that, and in so doing, they are encroaching upon your rights. And we have to hold these rights as sacred and sacrosanct, because it goes to the deeper meaning of who we are as a nation and a people. And the sooner that we realize this, and the sooner that we go back to analyzing this in a ration-based or reason-based analysis like this, the better off we are. So whether you agree with the position that I'm holding here or not, I want you to ask yourselves, what is it that I am seeking to accomplish here? How is it that you can then justify the encroachment upon rights without contradicting other rights? Again, equal protection under the law means that rights are afforded the same equal weight of application. They are equally important in the eyes of the law, just as all citizens are equally important in the eyes of the law. At least, that is how it's intended to be. But when you start allowing the contradictory aspects of it all to come to fruition, when you start bowing down to the twisted machinations of those like the Fabian Socialists who are hell-bent on tearing this nation apart at the seams, that's when you start to encounter the sort of duplicity and lack of fairness that's within the system. It's not the system that's failing, it's those who are attempting to fundamentally transform the system that are failing us. They are the ones that are marching against us. They are the ones that are putting us in the precarious situation and position that we find ourselves as I speak into this microphone. And therefore, does it make any sense whatsoever to sit back and say that all gun owners should be punished for the actions of a few? Yet, while at the same time, when we see that the Pulse gay nightclub shooting that occurred in Orlando, Florida, a week or two ago, a little bit more, I think it's more 2 weeks ago. Anyway, that part's not important. But what we see with that, when that shooting is carried out by someone who has an ideological bent towards the Islamo-fascist state of ISIS, they instantly come out and say that we shouldn't carte blanche, in a stereotypical broad brush, paint the entire so-called Muslim community in that light. But then they turn right around and say that all guns should be banned, or we should start restricting gun owners. As if these people who loathe and despise our legal system, who loathe and despise the entire American system of polity, would follow the laws. No, what they're doing is they're seeking to disarm us. They're seeking to place the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours in a precarious situation. They're seeking to place us to where we are at a disadvantage. Now, does that make any sense? Does that sound like what a truly intelligent position would be? Does that sound like what someone who actually cares about the citizens and the security of the citizens would do? No. Of course not. But that's the thing. They don't, they have never, they will never care about what they claim. They just use that as some sort of rationalization and justification so that they can go forth to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media in an attempt to dupe the American people into thinking that they're looking out for our best interests, while at the same time they are proactively and incessantly moving towards stripping us of our fundamental and inalienable rights. This political kabuki theater, which is what this boils down to, folks, plays out like a terribly drafted soap opera time and again. And it has only intensified throughout these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. Because everywhere we turn, we see that he goes out and engages in criminality by trying to give all of these drug cartels firearms and straw purchasing through programs such as Fast and Furious and Operation Gunrunner, and then try and blame our right to keep and bear firearms. This is all orchestrated in that way. Recall that former Attorney General Eric Holder said that we need to make gun owners viewed in the same light of distrust as those who use tobacco products, or, to more concisely align with what he had actually said, it was to view them with the same social stigma as cigarette smokers. And we've seen what that campaign has done. We have seen how they are now trying to push to take custody away from parents who are smokers. Why? Well, again, it's about power and control. It's about centralization. These are the sorts of things you would expect to see in a tin-pot dictatorship like Nazi Germany. Remember, Nazi Germany was anti-smoking, anti-tobacco. They were health nuts, and the state wanted the children to be the most precious aspect of everything, and that's why they went and worked these laws into place, stripping rights from individuals. And again, that all comes down to a notion of what they want to do is to be the end-all, be-all with every aspect of what's important within a society. They want to be the ones that have the hand on the lever of control. But truth be told, 9 times out of 10, they are the ones who should least be trusted. They are the ones who should be the last to wield power. And that's why we see that they work against an electoral system like our government and try to implement bureaucracies, where these unelected, nameless, faceless, and ultimately unaccountable bureaucrats are able to determine what happens in our lives, right down to what health care we receive, whether or not we can possess firearms, whether or not we can defend ourselves, whether or not we can raise our children as we see fit. That is dangerous. Because, again, the federal government, by the very design of our Federalist Republic, has to trace its authority back to a specially enumerated power. Well, these bureaucracies were not enumerated. Now, sure. The frothing of the mouth, Fabian Socialists and their allies in the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media will attempt to peddle the narrative that this was an inferred power. It was an inferred delegation of authority, and that they're allowed to do that. Only to a small extent, and certainly not to the extent that we see it basically infesting our country right now as I speak into this microphone. Rather, we should go back to actually following the Constitution. If that's the one thing that any of you take away from any of these programs, that would be the best. It is that the Constitution is the key. And going back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the 4 corners of that sacred document would be the step towards placing the United States of America back onto the path to prosperity. Now, that duty and obligation and above all responsibility falls squarely on our shoulders. Again, that's by the very inherent and intrinsic design of this representative republic of ours. Our founding fathers expected it to be that way. They would have expected us to stand up at any given and available opportunity to resist these attempts to encroach upon our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That has not changed. Like the natural law tenets that form the foundation of our country, that is timeless. It's because it is the natural law. The natural law is not some made-up thing. It's not some abstract notion that's just floating out there. It is engraved upon the hearts of every man and woman. Whether we be natural-born citizens or naturalized citizens in our capacity as popular sovereigns of the United States of America, it is intrinsically endowed and inscribed on our hearts. And all of that goes in with the value of life, with the value of freedom, with the value of what we strive to achieve both as a nation and as a people. But the historical revisionists and the frothing at the mouth Fabian Socialists who are hell-bent on spinning a narrative and throwing it out through the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, they are trying to erase that from our collective conscience. And I even pause to use that. I don't like using the term collective, but in a sense, here it applies. Because when you go to the opening lines to the preamble of the United States Constitution, it starts off with "We the people do ordain and establish." In other words, the government traces its authority back to we the people. We delegated that authority. And whenever authority is delegated, that authority can be taken away if the one who is acting as an agent, going back to law here, an agent is someone who acts on your behalf, has delegated authority. If that agent abuses that power and authority, it can be taken back. Here's where the Fabian Socialists and the big government frothing at the mouth left-wingers don't want you to think about it. Here is the notion of logic that they don't want to adhere to, because they realize that if we adhere to that, if we make that an intrinsic part of what we are saying, what we're attempting to accomplish here, then that means that their power goes away. And I know that I've mentioned that since the opening of this Solo Flight special, but it's that important. The roots of it go back to the origins of our country. And it is so important that we pay attention to that, because that is the way in which we will overcome all of the adversities, all of the hurdles, all of the obstructions and obstacles that these nefarious Fabian Socialists have been throwing in our path in an attempt to dislodge us and in an attempt to destroy us. Now, I wish that I could say that I have words of solace with respect to the government, but I don't. The Founding Fathers said that the greatest threat would always be the government. It's why they didn't trust the central authority. It's why the Articles of Confederation, which were the first governmental documents that were, first set to paper at the start of the Revolution, denied the federal government the ability to levy taxes. They thought that that was giving a central authority too much power. And one of the greatest concerns voiced by the Anti-Federalists in the Anti-Federalist Papers was that this new Constitution, or at least new at that time, Constitution gave alarming amounts of authority to the central government, and even though it was made with the best of intentions, again that old adage, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, it would be abused. And they were right. The compromise that they came up with, however, goes back to George Mason and those unquestionable natural law conclusions that he drew up and that he envisioned when he was called upon to help draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia, and then put forth the Bill of Rights. There we go. There's the compromise, the Bill of Rights. It was not an easy thing to come up with. It took years to get it in. We go from the late 1780s all the way to 1791, the end of 1791. December of 1791 is when the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, was finally ratified. And that was because there were knockout, drag-down fights, that occurred with the delegates. The Federalists thought that we didn't need, for the most part, any type of Bill of Rights. They thought that that was redundant, unnecessary, that the Constitution spoke for itself, and that there would be no need to have a Bill of Rights. But you've got to keep in mind that people like George Mason and Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson and various others inherently distrusted any type of ambiguity that would exist within the framework of the foundational documents of a government, because the Bill of Rights in the British Constitution, and indeed the entire British Constitution, is unwritten. That is where a quote-unquote living document comes into it. Constitution of the United States of America is not living. And we don't want it to be living, because that means that with any minor sweeping political fad that might overcome the body politique of the United States of America would allow our entire bedrock principles, foundations, and our fundamental and inalienable rights to be swept aside in the name of political convenience, or for the promotion of a particular political view, irrespective of its deleterious impact, irrespective of how it might harm the greater community. Again, that is something that is wholly unacceptable. And I say it's wholly unacceptable because when you stop and think about it, these foundations are based and rooted in the natural law. It means that they are an intrinsic part, a never-changing aspect of who we are, not only as a nation, but also as a people. And everywhere we turn, we see that when we start whittling away at that notion, and when we start distancing ourselves from that notion, that's when all of the societal and moral decay starts to set in. That's when we start to struggle with moral relativism. That's when we start to see all of our hopes, dreams, and aspirations torn asunder. And again, for what purpose? For what goal? Other than to line the pockets of corrupt Fabian Socialists and their enablers. And we see that with Donald Trump, we have such an enabler. We have the man who funded this by greasing the palms of politicians for so very long now. For 30-plus years, he has played this game. But because of the kid gloves that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media used with him, they were implementing a process here of creating this false narrative that Donald J. Trump was not a politician, that he was an outsider, that he didn't play a political game, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Just look at the way that he now custom tailors a particular message to a particular audience, irrespective of whether it's contradictory to something that he said a day ago, or even in the same sentence. That, right there, folks, is the sort of political activity, the sort of intellectually disingenuous positions that are put forth by elitists, and make no mistake about it, folks, Donald Trump is an elitist that alienates and disenfranchises the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. We have to dig within ourselves. We have to look within our own hearts, our own souls, and our own minds to come to the inexorable conclusion that we must. And that inexorable conclusion that we must draw is that the natural law by its very nature is timeless. That it's just as applicable today as it was 235 years ago, as God willing it will be 235 years from now as I speak into this microphone. But the only way that we're going to see that that is accomplished, the only way that we're going to see fit that that continues uninterrupted, as our founding fathers always originally intended for it to be, is for us to become more proactive in the maintenance and safeguarding of our God-given rights. And that is so difficult in this era of overzealous regulation, of instant gratification, of distraction, and of despair. For lack of a better term, there really is no other way to refer to it other than as despair. And it has been the goal, not only of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and their Fabian Socialist allies, but also of the detente wing of the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP, to make the American people despondent. They want to divorce us from our sacred system of government. And that's not to say that I'm placing government on a sanctified field or plane. All I'm saying is that our Constitution is divinely inspired. Yes, it is flawed because it's man-made. Anything that man does will not achieve perfection, at least not in this mortal earthly realm. But the fact that it's the longest contiguous running Constitution, the fact that it has saved more lives than any other form of government, and that it has stood up for good, righteousness, and justice more than any other form of government, speaks volumes as to why we should not consider it a living document, because if something's alive, that means it can be killed, that it's not just a mere set of guidelines. The language of the document itself, going back again to Article 6, Clause 2, states in no uncertain terms that the Constitution itself comprises the first fundamental step of the natural law, of the supreme law of the land. And the only statutes and various other governmental acts which are legitimate and follow the natural flow of things are those that are made in pursuance of the Constitution. That means that they have to follow the Constitution, that they have to be a part of that ongoing process. And so if they are directly contrary to the language contained within the Constitution, then they become violative of the supreme law of the land. Now, yes, the way that the courts have acted over the years, and certainly with these ridiculous decisions like the Voisin case that was handed down yesterday, shows that they are ignoring it. But again, as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oft-times reiterated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, this traces its root back to a power that the court handed to itself in that case of Marbury versus Madison. The power of judicial review was never enumerated unto the highest court in the land by the Constitution. Now, Congress could create courts that had judicial review power. Congress could. The Constitution is clear to that within Article 1. However, the Supreme Court was never meant to do what it's doing. It was just there on a case-by-case basis to determine whether the Constitution had been adhered to, not to interpret the meaning of the Constitution. That's a dangerous line. And again, we point to the Ninth Amendment to the Bill of Rights that specifically states that the Constitution is not to be interpreted. Merely, it's to be followed. Now, I'm not saying that in some form of absolutism. I'm not saying that that is a totalitarian thing. No, the Constitution is there to prevent totalitarianism. It's there to prevent despotism, because that's what our founding fathers went to war against in that long, drawn-out, and bloody struggle known as the American War of Independence. It was that fight that we had to take on in order to not only secure independence, but to hand down this greatest government ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above. And they expected it to be handed down to progeny. They expected the popular sovereigns to proactively maintain and safeguard their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And that's where we are now. We have been deluded. We have been pushed away. The truth has been obfuscated. And it's as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs said in his magnus opus, Keynes at Harvard, that the Fabian Socialists engage in this sort of conduct because they want to make you so distracted that you just don't have the energy or the capability or the capacity to do your duty, obligation, and above all, your responsibility to proactively maintain and safeguard your rights, and to ensure that this free, open, and honest representative republic that is constitutionally endowed is handed down to your offspring. But the fact that it was meant to be handed down to the progeny reaffirms the natural law aspects that form the bedrock principles of the Constitution. It reaffirms everything that our founding fathers believed. with respect to the scope and application of government and the proper execution of governmental power and authority. And when we have people like Judge Richard Posner come out and say that, as intelligent as our founding fathers were, the Constitution has no value in a modern society, after he has sworn an oath not only as a licensed attorney, but also as a sitting judge to uphold and defend the Constitution, he needs to be held accountable for that. That's another problem we've had. We have simply not been holding people accountable for their words, their deeds, and their actions. Well, enough is enough. It is time that we get back to holding people accountable. It is time that we get back to defending our Constitution, and that we get back to a modicum of sanity in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and community of popular sovereigns of ours. And nobody else can do that, because again, that is squarely our duty, our obligation, and our responsibility. And everywhere we turn in this once thriving country, we see that these nefarious forces, the Fabian Socialists, the utopian socialists, the moral relativists, the historical revisionists, all of them, are acting in such a way as to strip and deprive us of our rights. But we hold the key, and we hold the power in our capacity as popular sovereigns to bring an end to their twisted machinations. And that is the message of empowerment that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, seek to bring you, because it is of the utmost importance. Now, with that said, it's time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Folks, I guarantee you she's not going to revise any contracts you may have or attempt to encroach upon your rights. She's just there to pour you another glass of alcohol. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I also invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have either here on our YouTube page or our Google Plus page or our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my First Officer Jeremy Grapenton, our Blogspot account, which lists audio blogs and has some other various useful trinkets of information. And speaking of trinkets, you will also find our Cafe Press account that has products with our logo on it, our first-class passenger logo on it. That includes drinking glasses, hats, shoes, tote bags, iPod, iPhone, iPad, and all of the Android counterparts to that, covers, and even dog clothing. I mean, there's such a wide array of stuff there, folks, that you could surely find something that meets your fancy. Go ahead and take a look for that, folks, and give us a little bit of support. We really do appreciate it. After all, we couldn't do this without you, and we do this to empower you. Once again, folks, thank you for flying the Wright Flyer. We'll see you again next time. Do take care.